The 2010 Atlanta Press Club debates, brought to you live from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Now the Republican race for the 13th Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Davis, news anchor for WAGA Fox 5 Atlanta, and welcome to our 2010 primary election campaign debates, originating from the studios of GPB. Tonight's debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. Now, let's meet the Republican candidates facing each other in Georgia's 13th Congressional District primary election. They are in alphabetical order. Mike Crane, he's a general contractor. Hank Dudek is in sales. Chip Flanegan is a small business owner. Deborah Huneycutt is a physician. Dave Orr is in restaurant management, and Rupert Parchment is a small business owner. Here is the format for tonight's debate in the first round. Each candidate will answer a question from our three panelists, and in the second round, the candidates will ask a question of one of their opponents. Each candidate will have time for rebuttal in this round, and in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 60 seconds to make a closing statement. Before we get started, let's meet our three panelists. They were selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Tom Baxter, editor and reporter for Southern Political Report. Then Jeremy Redmond, staff reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And our third panelist is Harry Weber, who is a reporter for the Associated Press. Now, it's time to get started with our debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. The candidates have 30 seconds to answer each question, and as moderator, I will determine if a rebuttal is necessary. By random selection, Chip Flanegan gets the first question from Tom Baxter.
Mr. Flanegan, you've said that you have been what you called a crisis budgeter. I like that in your business for more than 20 years. So could you tell us how you would apply the principles that you're talking about there in a major national crisis like the Gulf oil spill? I mean, what should be the priorities in responding to a disaster like this, and how do you pay for it?
Well, the paying for it is going to be paid for predominantly by the oil company that caused it. The number one thing that you have to do in a crisis is immediately go into action, as in our fire. When we were there, we only had, we burned all night. We were open at 8 o'clock the next morning. We had crews there cleaning up. We never closed. Our phones were forwarded, and we went immediately back to work. And that's what should have happened in the Gulf oil crisis.
Thank you. Jeremy Redmond, it's his turn now to ask a question of Dave Orr.
Mr. Orr, good evening. A lot of the candidates in this race are talking about the fair tax. In other words, replacing the national income tax with a national sales tax. Tell me your position on that issue, please.
That is my biggest issue. I'm a huge fan of the fair tax. I think the fair tax could single-handedly save America from the deep recession that we are in. It would treat America as the beacon of liberty and of capitalism that it should be. We have chased away companies with our excessive tax codes, and the fair tax would welcome them back. And I believe that in doing so, we'd also be able to take care of our unemployments. It would bring back capital, worldwide investment back to America, which would increase jobs in America and also wealth in America.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. Next is Harry Weber's question for Mike Crane.
Good evening, Mr. Crane. The economy is growing again, but it isn't exactly humming, and unemployment is still remains very high. What specifically would you do as a member of Congress to stimulate job creation?
Well, I'd have to agree with what Dave was talking about. I believe a restructuring of our tax code is what's going to initiate a strong recovery. When you punish investment, when you punish income, when you punish doing well through our current tax structure, you're hurting the country and you're hurting the economy. I think with something similar to the flat tax, you will see a remarkable surge in economic growth.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Tom Baxter for Deborah Huneycutt.
Dr. Huneycutt, the 13th Congressional District, as you know, came into being after the 1990 reapportionment as a very irregularly shaped district that stretched across several counties, and it was the first district in our state's history that didn't have a racial majority. And it's since been redrawn into a somewhat more regularly shaped district with a slight African-American majority. And with the state adding at least one new district next year after reapportionment, there's sure to be a new map. So what should be the main principles under which the new district, the district that you would represent, should be drawn, and what communities of interest should be protected?
Well, as we look at the drawing of the districts, and of course, as a U.S. representative, I would have no direct input into that. But I think the district should be a district that has all people in it. There should be no racial divisions, no income divisions. It should be a district that represents a number of people, and that representative, that U.S. Congressional representative of that district, will have the opportunity to represent American-type situations.
I'm sorry, time is up. Our next question comes from Jeremy Redmond. His question is for Hank Dudek.
Mr. Dudek, good evening. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And tell me, Mr. Dudek, your position on the national health care reform legislation. What would you seek to do concerning it if you're elected?
I would repeal the bill, and then I would start by not implementing any new laws. What I would do is increase competition. The two main issues we're looking at are affordability and accessibility, and I don't think the government actually talked about that. I have 2 type 1 diabetic children, and it did nothing to quantify how that would save me money, how it would gain access to people who can't get health care right now. So we need to hold the government accountable for accessibility, and we need to hold them accountable for affordability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudek. And now Harry Weber will ask a question for Rupert Parchment.
I asked the same question to the Democrats. I think it's more applicable for the Republicans. Mr. Parchment, many people would say that Congressman David Scott, who isn't here tonight, is a lock for this race. What do you bring to the table that you think will create a surprise in November, and what do you think your chances are?
What I bring, thank you for the question. What I bring to the table this November is most of the Democratic voters are going to come over and be upset about the fact that Mr. Scott has not provided solutions. What I bring to the table are solutions. I've gone throughout the district, walked the district, and I speak to people. I'm accessible, and I answer the questions that people in the district have. Like Ms. Tinch here from Clayton County, I go there into the district and I find solutions to the problems that people are experiencing, and I'm there, I am present. That's why I'll win.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parchment. And that concludes round 1. It's time now for our candidates to ask a question of one of their opponents. They have 15 seconds for the question and 30 seconds to respond, and then 50 seconds for rebuttal. By random selection, Deborah Huneycutt asks the first question. Ms.
Thank
Huneycutt.
you. My question is for Mr. Crane. And Mr. Crane, I do appreciate your comments about District 13's need for a champion. But prior to 2010, what did you do that evidenced you as a champion in District 13?
Well, thank you, Deborah. As a contractor, I built lots of things in District 13 that had a big impact on the economy and helped a lot of folks. I raised my family, and I did the things every good American did, thinking the system would work and correct itself. But I see now that it will not correct itself without some true leadership. I saw that your 2 previous attempts to unseat him were unsuccessful, and I thought I would get into the race and make a difference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crane. The time does go fast. Ms. Huneycutt, would you like to have a rebuttal?
I appreciate his fervor about having a job, like all of us have in the district. And I was looking for some things that he actually volunteered in the district, worked in the district, helped people in the district. Those were the kinds of things that would show me he's a champion.
All right, thank you very much. Hank Dudek may now ask a question of one of the opponents.
Dr. Huneycutt, you have stated that you would vote to allow tens of millions of illegals to plead guilty to violating our immigration laws, pay a fine, and then be put on a pathway to citizenship. Can you tell the voters at home, in your own words, nobody else's, how much that proposed fine should be and why you believe legalizing tens of millions that broke our laws makes you a conservative voice for the 13th District?
Thank you for that question and the opportunity to clear that up for you. I do believe that we, in order to deal with the immigration problem, we have to do it in a just manner. Everyone needs to be accountable for breaking the law. Every single illegal immigrant, illegal alien will be penalized. After the penalization, then what are we going to do with all of these people. They'll go to the back of the line and then come forward as U.S. citizens after
Dr.
the
Huneycutt,
entire
your time
process
is up.
has gone through.
Mr. Dudek, do you have a response?
Yes. Deborah Huneycutt and Mike Crane fail to realize what illegal immigration is costing this country every day. American citizens who are trying to use our healthcare system, our educational systems, and entitlement systems are being drowned out right now by people who cannot pay for the services that they are currently using.
All right, thank you. Mr. Crane, he called your name. Would you like to comment?
He did, didn't he? I saw that. Well, Hank's got a pie-in-the-sky solution for everything. He wants to build a wall around his sandbox and keep everybody out that way. I think it's a little more complex than that, and I think the issues are just a little more complex than he makes them out to be.
All right, Mr. Crane, it's now your turn to ask a question.
Ms. Huneycutt, if I may, your last 2 election cycles you used a fundraising firm that took the disproportionate share of the fundraising amounts given. Do you think the people who gave to your campaign deserve refunds?
Oh, of course not. I used a wonderful fundraising group. And it's interesting that so many of us, especially as African American Republicans, have limited ways in order to raise money. So I thank so much the company that I did use that were able to help me raise money to do a great campaign, and I'm looking forward to doing even better this year.
Mr. Crane, was there a reason why you asked that question?
Are you using them this year?
Oh, in terms of using them, we have already gotten all of the mail order names and whatnot. That was part of the bargain. We got it. We bought it. And that's what we're using to the best of our ability this year.
All right. Again, it's question and answer and rebuttal. Rupert, Parchment, you have your question opportunity now.
Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Dudek, if you had a choice, given the high spending, the bailout nature and stimulus going on in Washington, if you had a choice between the fair tax or lowering corporate and income taxes by 50%, which would you choose?
I would choose the fair tax for sure, because I think the fair tax is fair to everybody. The corporate tax would just be fair to corporations. The bottom line is corporations don't pay taxes. They charge those taxes back to the customers. We end up paying the taxes. That's the great thing about the fair tax. It actually gets the money back into the hands of the people and gives financial control back to the people of this country and takes it away from government so they can't use class warfare against us anymore. They can't use our tax code for political purposes. That's not what we need in this country. We need a system that's fair for everybody, not only people that are here, but everybody.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parchment, do you have a
Absolutely.
rebuttal?
The problem with Mr. Dudek's assessment is that I tried to help out by saying what this current spending market is, but the fair tax will not work unless we cut government spending and then implement it. The spending is too high to implement a fair tax. We may have to raise it from the 23% upwards to 40 to 50 to meet the expectation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parchment. Our next question will be asked by Dave Orr.
There are only 2 people up here who actually live and vote in the 13th District. My question is for one who does not. Rupert Parchment, you have stated on numerous occasions that you live in Midtown. Your representative is John Lewis, a Democrat. Please tell the 13th District why you chose to not run as a representative for yourself, your family, your neighbors, and your community in your own district.
Thank you for the question, sir. I am running for this district for everyone in District 13. The issue that we're experiencing is this. If people who are running for office would read the Constitution and read our legislature more, they'd find out that I am a U.S. citizen, I am over 25 years old, and I'm living in Georgia before the election. The issue is this. The problems and the issues that affect District 13 go beyond a line. It's not just hunger is not just in District 13. Unemployment is not just in District 13. These issues are going throughout the district, and given next year in 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Parchment. Your time is up. Mr. Orr, do you have some rebuttal?
Sure. So I take it that you chose not to run in your own district because you're happy with the representation and the voting record of John Lewis. I'm good.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Chip Flanegan, it's time for a question from you for one of your opponents.
My question is to Dr. Huneycutt. Dr. Huneycutt, in the last campaign, you raised and spent about $40 a vote to David Scott's about $4 a vote. And he beat you by over double. What are you going to do different this time?
Time for your question, Mr. Please respond.
Thank you. One of the things that's different this time is the voters. The voters are no longer being bamboozled by David Scott. The voters are saying, wait a minute, we voted for what we thought we were going to get, but we really didn't get it. So it's not how much money you spend, and I can tell you many other candidates spend a lot of money and don't win. It's getting out there with the voters. With my urban initiative, I'll be getting those other few votes that I need to actually win this race.
All right. Mr. Crane, did you have a rebuttal?
Mr. Flanegan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Flanegan, did you have a rebuttal?
Yes. As I watched the campaign last time and it unfold this time, the problem is they're not connecting with the people in the district. The people are hurting because their home values have been destroyed by the Congress and the actions that they've done. And until that's articulated to them...
Mr. Flanegan, I'm sorry. The time is up. And that concludes our second round of questioning. For those who may be joining our program right now in progress, this is the debate among the candidates for Georgia's 13th Congressional District in the Republican primary. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of the candidate of his choice. Candidates will be allowed 30 seconds to respond. And as moderator, I will determine if an opposing candidate will be given 15 seconds for rebuttal. We begin this round with a question from Tom Baxter.
I might just ask Mr. Parchment, did Mr. Parchment get the chance to ask a question in the last round?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You did. I'm sorry.
I can ask another one if you like.
No.
There's plenty.
No, I'm sorry. You, Mr. Parchment, are not alone in this race in being opposed to the cap-and-trade bill. But if you reject that as a means for reducing carbon emissions, how do you propose to bring that about, or do you think that that's important to do?
I think what's important right now is we should be a good steward over the country and the land that God has given us. However, we also should not impose a cap-and-trade policy, which is more of a cap-and-raid, capping American prosperity while raiding our treasury. The problem is that it's a control and tax measure by many Democrats in Washington, and we need to stop these types of incursions on our free market principles.
Mr. Parchment, thank you. And now Jeremy Redmond will ask a question.
Dr. Huneycutt, good evening. You stated that you opposed Barack Obama for president because he supports what you call, quote-unquote, black genocide, which is a reference to his support for abortion rights. Please elaborate on what you mean by that.
I am so glad you asked that, Jeremy. When we look at the people having abortions, 40% of the abortions are being had by only 5 to 6% of the population. That's the African American females who are in childbearing age. So when we look at what abortion has done, has helped to reduce the population of black folks since 1973. That is black genocide.
Dr. Huneycutt, thank you. Harry Weber, it's your turn for our next question.
Mr. Dudek, a lot of politicians in Washington speak in broad generalizations and don't offer many specifics. I think that's what a lot of folks think is wrong with Washington. So I'm hoping you can be very specific with your answers to this question. Do you think that our country is going in the right direction? And if not, what would you do differently if elected to Congress?
I've talked about the fundamental transformation that Barack Obama's talked about. We've already seen it with health care reform, financial reform today, immigration reform that these folks would vote for. And I see cap and trade. I see a card check coming. The problem with our government today is they want to take the power away from the individual, and they want to control our lives. And we need to get back to promoting the individual in this country for achievement. It's not about government in our lives. It's about promoting each individual, no matter how rich they are, no matter how poor they are, but giving them all the same opportunity to achieve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudek. And now Tom Baxter, your next question.
Mr. Orr, you on your website have the flat statement that, and I quote, the regulations surrounding offshore and Alaskan drilling, refineries, and nuclear energy need to be removed, not modified or anything, to be removed. Does the Gulf oil spill disaster cause you to reconsider that statement?
Thank you for the question, and no, it doesn't actually. Picture this. You're an owner of ExxonMobil. Your competitor BP just had a horrible, horrible accident. They are thanking their lucky stars that wasn't them. And you bet your lucky stars that they are calling every one of their management teams and saying, this better not happen to us ever. It is self-regulation. That is absolutely what I believe in. We have an area in Anwar right now that we should have been drilling in. We chose not to. We are governing ourselves, and we need to release those barriers.
But I mean, self-regulation, you're talking about an area of the Gulf that hundreds of miles have now been despoiled by this oil spill, and a lot of small businessmen are going to be put out of business for the rest of their lives, potentially. How is the competitive hand of the market working in this situation?
Okay. Picture this. If we regulate even further, those regulations are not going to apply to Russia as they drill 90 miles off the coast of Key West in Cuba. They're in discussions with Cuba about drilling 90 miles off Key West. The further we regulate ourselves, it's not going to apply to Russia. And they're going to still drill in the same Gulf that's covered in oil right now. It's a horrible, horrible disaster, don't get me wrong. We should have been doing a better job of inspections and using the current laws that we have in place. But two things made a mistake there. A, the inspectors didn't do a good job, and the people running BP didn't do a good job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoare. And now our next question, Jeremy Redmond.
Mr. Parchment, good evening. You said on your website that you reject the notion that Israel is free to defend herself without our support. Instead, I believe that we should assist in defending, protecting, and eliminating any threat to her sovereignty as a peaceful nation. What threat or threats are you contemplating here concerning Israel?
I think thank you for the question, first of all, but I think Israel is surrounded and getting threatened daily. I believe the cries of some of these terrorist nations are saying that we need to end Israel and the USA. Israel has a right to protect her sovereignty and the freedom of her people. And as her ally, the United States should be there in lockstep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parchment. And now, Mr. Weber, your next question.
Dr. Huneycutt, a lot of folks talk about experience being important for members of Congress. What is it about your background that you believe sets you apart from the other challengers in this race?
Oh, good. Thank you so much for asking that. I've had experience in lobbying, in testifying at the state, lobbying on the federal level, but also I've had experience in terms of the Georgia Academy of Family Physicians, 2,500 strong across our state, being their president, being their board chair, and that is the way I got into politics, so to speak, understanding the processes and what goes on, and not being politically naive.
Our next question, Mr. Baxter.
Mr. Crane, you have considerable experience in the construction business. What do you think are the biggest infrastructure needs in your district, and how would you go about addressing them?
Well, a lot of the infrastructure needs in the district have a lot to do with just roads, sewer, and water, obviously. I believe those things are local issues, and I think they should be regulated from the state and the local area. I'm a strict constitutionalist, and I believe that the federal government should have a very limited role in local affairs. So I would encourage local legislators and local politicians to handle those issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crane. Mr. Redmond.
My colleague, Mr. Baxter, raised this earlier. I want to raise the same question with Mr. Flanegan. You've said on your website that you would seek to authorize the exploration of proven energy reserves, and that you would seek to reduce regulatory barriers to all forms of energy creation. Given the BP oil spill, does that make you rethink those statements?
No. The free market system is the best system to regulate and run the oil system. When the government makes winners like the gasoline, where they've come up with gasohol, we're spending more money to make gasohol than it costs to make, and we're using more gasoline to make the gasohol than we are getting production. That's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. Allow the free market system to do what it does best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flanegan. Mr. Weber.
Mr. Orr, I heard you say earlier that you're a supporter of the fair tax. Can you please explain to us what is fair about a tax in which we are changing the structure of how we tax individuals? For many years, owning a home has been an important investment for many Americans, and they view it as an opportunity to get a deduction on their taxes. But effectively, by eliminating the current tax code, you'd be eliminating the reason many people go and buy homes and put value into those homes. Why do you think the fair tax is actually fair as compared to our current system?
Well, the tax advantage or supposed advantage that is portrayed by realtors mostly really applies to people that are high income. The people that are low income, their percentage of taxes is very low, so therefore the write-off is very low. So that doesn't have anything to do with it. What it would do is create more jobs, more investment, and put more money in people's pockets on a day-to-day basis. That's what makes it fair. People pay taxes on what they spend, not on what they earn. So it creates the opportunity to invest and save.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orr. Mr. Baxter.
Mr. Dudek, the banking reform bill that passed last night is so big and has so many parts that it's a little hard to ask for an up or down on this. I heard Saxby Chambliss today interviewed, and he said that even though he had voted against the bill, he felt that it would bring some important improvements in the financial system. How do you come down on this? What do you see as good or bad in the legislation that was passed?
Well, the irony here is that the government, which created the housing crisis by pushing these loans on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, have now come up with a great financial reform bill that doesn't include Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So we have to ask ourselves, how, number one, if we worked in the private sector, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd worked in the private sector, they would be in jail for the mess that they created with the housing crisis. And so I'm not for this bill at all. I would not sign on to this bill. It did not include the two institutions that were most responsible for the housing crisis, and it didn't meet the needs of the people of this country.
Mr. Dudek, thank you. Mr. Redmond.
Dr. Huneycutt, one of your opponents raised this issue earlier, and I want to seek some clarity here. In the last election, most of the more than $4 million you raised went to BMW Direct, the direct mail firm that raised the money for you. I want to know what business relationship, if any, you have with BMW Direct in this current election.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would kind of like to correct you there, because most of the money did not go to BMW Direct. We did have a couple of $1 million to spend right here in the district. So let that be known. And I don't have any business affiliation with them at all. It's interesting, they're the same persons that are doing organizing and fundraising for Allen West. They've done Jim Ryan, other people also. So it's just interesting to me
very much, Dr.
that I was picked
We're
out.
out of time. Thank you. And that concludes our third round. At this time, we're going to prepare for closing statements. We have no more time for the questions. The primary for the 13th Congressional District will be held, of course, on July 20th. Right now, we're going to have our closing statements. And each candidate will have 60 seconds to prepare, present their closing statement. And we begin with Chip Flanegan.
Well, thank you very much to everyone from the Atlanta Press Club to put this debate on. My policy in this whole thing is to connect the dots between the problems that we have in this district and my part of the district, that part that I run my business out of is Clayton County. And we have been suffering. The home values have been decimated by the actions of the Congress, and they have scapegoated and pointed their fingers to other individuals and other entities. And it's time that the people that caused the problem pay the price. And the people that have suffered from it need to know that. And that's been my platform since I got into this race. I'm a 30-year businessman in the district. I've been looking across the counter from the customers in the district for 30 years.
Thank you very much. And now, Rupert Parchment, will have 60 seconds for a closing statement.
Thank you again, Atlanta Press Club. Throughout this campaign, Rupert Parchment has been the candidate that has brought solutions. Solutions for jobs, solutions for educational choice for parents, solutions for transportation with a rail line, solutions for fixing our tax and spending and the cancer of government growth going on in Washington. I understand hardship. I've been through hardship myself. God knows I have. But through faith and family, we've all pulled through it. Rupert Parchment is continually and will continue to be your voice in Washington. I'm asking you for your support July 20th, 2010. And there's three things that I would like for you. And I have a solution for congressional reform in District 13. 1, vote for Parchment July 20th, 2010. 2, remember in November. And 3, vote Parchment for Congress November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave Orr, time for your closing statement.
Hello. I have owned and operated my own business both here in Atlanta and throughout the Southeast for the last 15 years. I believe the solutions to the problems that we're in right now is through less government. By less government, I mean lower taxes, freedom from excessive regulation, and by all means, we need to stop this spending spree that we're on. I mean, that really goes to the heart of it. Every one of us knows deep in our heart the government is spending money it doesn't have, and they're trying to do it to buy votes. It's just wrong. It's flat out wrong. I wouldn't be in this race right now if I wasn't the subject of redistricting. I once had Phil Gingrey as my representative. He's a fantastic representative who holds regular town meetings. He sends you updates from Washington and lets you know what's going on, both the good and the bad. That's the kind of representation you can get from me. I live in the district, and that's what I want to bring to you. There are 4 other candidates up here, and I suggest that you find out which ones do and do not live in the district, because you should say to yourself, why are they running if they have their own representation? Thank you. Dave Orr, less government.
Thank you very much. And now Hank Dudek will give his closing statement.
We have to ask ourselves why we're here tonight. We're here to unseat David Scott. If we're just going to elect representatives that agree with David Scott on immigration, like Mike Crane and Deborah Huneycutt, what's the point? What's the point for us to change our vote? I'm here as a conservative who acknowledges that our country is right now being fundamentally transformed to give government more power and to take power away from the individual. We need a new conservative voice in the 13th District, not a voice who agrees with David Scott on immigration reform and wants to help move that forward. We have to look at how immigration reform is killing our health care system, our educational system, and our entitlement system. We are losing billions of dollars a year, $1.6 billion to Georgians alone. And yet we stand here and say, pie-in-the-sky idea, Mr. Dudek, for building that fence. No, it's not a pie-in-the-sky idea. Any conservatives out there right now who want somebody who's going to represent them, please go to hankfordistrict13.com, and you can find out what I stand for, and you can find out what Mike Crane and Deborah Huneycutt stand for.
All right, thank you very much. And Deborah Huneycutt, it is now time for you to give your closing statement.
Thank you. Why should the citizens of District 13 vote for me, Dr. Deborah Huneycutt? I can effectively represent Dave Orr's call for less government and more freedom. I have the competitive furor of Hank Dudek. I have the economic restoration passion and articulation of Rupert Parchment. I have the Christian values and commitment of Mike Crane. And I advocate, like Mr. Flanegan, constitutional limits on government. So I invite you to do your voting due diligence and research all the candidates. You'll note that I have district, local, state, national support. I have endorsements from conservative groups, right-to-life groups, Republican groups, conservative radio talk show hosts, community groups, religious leaders, local and national. I'm sure that when you do your due diligence, you will find that I am the most qualified candidate to represent you as the next Congresswoman from Georgia's District 13.
Thank you very much. And our final closing statement comes from Mike Crane.
I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the viewers on TV. And I want to thank these patriots who have joined me here in defense of freedom. It is a call that we have to defend freedom. And the only place to defend it is in the halls of Washington right now, in Congress. And it's a very important race. This time around, the voters of the 13th District do have to pick a champion. And I believe that champion is myself. When it comes to character, commitment, and courage. The courage to sacrifice your resources, your time, your effort, and even put your family in harm's way to serve the people of the 13th District. I welcome the opportunity to be your voice in Washington, a clear, true, conservative voice so desperately needed. So please vote for Mike Crane for Congress and see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crane. And again, these are your candidates in the Republican primary for the 13th Congressional District. Mike Crane, a general contractor. Hank Dudek is in sales. Chip Flanegan is a small business owner. Deborah Huneycutt is a physician. Dave Orr is in restaurant management. And Rupert Parchment is a small business owner. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Joining us this evening, Tom Baxter, editor and reporter for the Southern Political Report, Jeremy Redmond, staff reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Harry Weber, who is a reporter for the Associated Press. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, July 20th. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. I'm Amanda Davis. Thanks for joining us for this primary election debate. We invite you to stay tuned for the primary election debate among the candidates in the Republican primary for Insurance Commissioner. That debate is coming up next.
The Atlanta Press Club debate series is made possible by a donation from the late Tom Watson Brown.